One of the main reasons why you should start to play Caro Kann is that you don't have to learn a bunch of theories. For example, if you're e5, e4, e5 player, you should start to learn the King's Gambit. You should start to learn the Italian game. For example, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4. You should start to learn the Spanish game. You should start to learn the Central game. You should start to learn the Scotch game. And there is very vast branches of the moves. But if you play Caro Kann, you in some way dictate the game, because white cannot impose you any tactics. For example, with bishop on f7 and so on. It's a very slow maneuvering game. It is great for your opponents, for example, 1800 or below elo, and but very also very good players play this opening. Grandmasters, for example, Karpov, the world chess champion, have very good games in this Caro Kann variations. And Caro Kann starts with e4, c6, d4, d5. You can practically pre-move d5, and here, like you see. Like you see from the right side, there is only 4 good moves for the white to play. He can play advanced variation, he can play with e5, he can play exchange variation with ed5, he can play the modern variation with knight to d2, and he can play the classical variation with knight to c3. And classical and modern variation very often transpose after this capture of the pawns into the same variation. So there is very few lines to learn, and you will be fine. Like we said, it is a slow and maneuvering game. Most often, just to say, the Caro Kann is established in 19th century by Horacio Caro and Marcus Kann. And here is the main position of the Caro Kann, and the main move for the white is e5, the advanced variation. We'll see what we can do. I recommend that you play c5 immediately. You challenge this white center, and very often white would play c3, and he can also capture this pawn, but we can talk more about that later. And here you can play knight to c6, just develop your piece, and your opponent will probably develop his knight on f3, and you exchange in the center, and now you decide what you should do with the bishop. You can play bishop to f5, or you can play bishop to f5, or bishop to g4. In this position, it's better to play bishop to g4, because it is the pin here, and you can always exchange this bishop for the knight or your opponent's bishop, and you basically have this French variation with better variation, because this light square bishop, which is the weakest square in the French defense, is behind this wall of pawns, not inside. And you have a very straightforward plan to develop your knight on g6 or to f5. You develop your bishop on e7, and you should short castle, and that is advanced variation. And now we'll see exchange variation, which is ed5, cd5, and for example bishop to d3. Here you can play knight to c6. Here is important to remember to develop knights before bishop. White can play c6, and you will develop your other knight, and your opponent probably develop a knight on f3 or bishop to f4, and you can pin your opponent's knight, and maybe after the short castle you can play again c6, e6, develop your knight on g7 or e7, short castle, and you will have a pleasant game. If your opponent challenge your bishop, you can go back, or you can decide what you want to do. You can also capture it on f3. That is exchange variation. And one of the moves, the variations which is the most challenging, it is the Panov variation, which is after the exchange variation, white can play this move c4, and this move c4 is maybe, like we said, one of the most challenging variation, but Just important to remember, don't capture this pawn, because you just help the white to develop his pieces, so you don't want to do that. Instead, you could support this pawn with a knight, and after, for example, white develop his knight, you again develop your other knight to 6-6. White can develop his knight on the f3, and you can play g6 now, and for example we have exchange here and we have pleasant game. We just develop the knight on g7, and we should short castle, and that is the Panov variation of the Caro Kann. The classical variation starts with knight to c3. White just defend this central pawn, and you should take the central pawn. We have exchange in the center, and now you can play various moves. You can play knight to f6, you can play knight to d7, you can play bishop to f5. And I recommend that you should play bishop to f5. Here you just take this knight, and he will most often play knight to g3. He go back, and now he takes your bishop. You always play bishop to g6. It's very nice diagonal for the bishop. You can play a6 h6 later. You can go back with your bishop, and so on. And here, for example, white can play knight to f3, and you can develop your other knight, to d7, and white can offer exchange of the bishops. It is perfectly fine to exchange this bishop, but I recommend to play e6. And after, for example, short castle, you should play bishop to d6, and now you'll develop your knight on f6 or e7. You should short castle, and you would have a pleasant game. Important to remember, if white capture your bishop, always recapture with h pawn, and not with f pawn. Now we'll see the last variation, which is the modern variation. It starts with knight to d2. We exchange in the center, and white recaptured. Like we said, we have various options here. We already see what happened if you play bishop to f5, and we will see in this variation, just for the change, you can play knight to f6, and here you should be a little bit careful. For example, white have a little bit venom here. He can play, for example, queen to e2, and if you blunder with knight to d7, he have checkmate in one, which is actually very beautiful checkmate, smother mate with the bishop. So don't do that. And most often here with white would just take your knight to damage your pawn structure, but this is very solid structure, and it is not a great weakness. Here white would play knight to f3. You would develop your knight. He will develop his knight. You will develop his bishop. He will develop his bishop. You will castle. He would castle, and like you said, you can pin his knight, and for example, he can play rook to e1. You will develop your knight. He will develop his bishop, and you can create this battery which spine this h2 pawn, and you have pleasant game. For example, if white tries to harass your bishop, you can exchange, but you also could go back, and you for example, he can take your knight again, and don't be afraid to go back, and even you can create this cube of the pawns, and looks odd, but it is actually very playable variation. You could also capture with this pawn, but it is better to create this cube and to play like this. We should see one variation of the Caro Kann from the advanced variation. We already saw what happened if white creates this pawn chain, but most grandmasters and all the strong players will play dc5, which is the most challenging way to play. And now don't panic, just play knight to c6. You will take this e5 pawn, and most often white would play a knight to f3 just to defend this e5 pawn, and you play bishop to g4 pin. He would play bishop to e2, we will play e6. Again, the French variation transposed into the French variation with better structure, because your bishop is not inside your wall of pawns. And here White can defend this pawn, and you will exchange your bishop, and you get your pawn back. And your game plan is very simple. Develop this knight on g6 or f5. You'll develop your bishop, and this pawn is always liability. So that is some variation of the Caro Kann. Just practice, and you'll be fine. And it is very solid, very solid opening, tough to crack. This is just the basic video. If you like it, you can press like, and we'll see you in next video with some other variations. See you next video. Bye.